Good morning, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. Pleasure of mine.
So let's try and untangle this whole issue. G7 meeting, apparently they agreed to sort of spend the proceeds, the interest earned on the frozen Russian assets on Ukraine. So has everyone agreed? Is that confirmed? And what can we expect?
Well, let's start probably from the very beginning of the story, as the Russian state-owned assets, which are indeed invested in the West, they constitute around 300 billion. It's quite an essential part of money, which, to my mind, should be completely used to compensate the damage as well as the current needs of Ukraine, because Russia has broken down any international agreements, UN declarations, and so on and so forth. It's the state which must pay for its wrongdoing. But for the time being, the prevailing opinion, starting from G7 to EU as well as US side, there is no common opinion whether we should use the whole amount of money, those 300 billion. So that's why there is a kind of the, I would call, compromise decision to use proceeds or the interest which come every year as a result of the economic growth. And again, it constitutes, as you rightly said, around 3 billion every year. So if to use 3 billion every year for the needs of Ukraine, again, it makes a tiny part of Ukraine's needs for example, humanitarian assistance, for macro-financial assistance, as well as for military needs, which Ukraine has so great in order to withstand Russian military threat. If it is for 10 years, for example, it's already 30 billion. Let's see how things will go. I really hope that will be any more discussions because we're already in a third year of Russian aggression, and we still didn't use in real those proceeds. So that's why, for me, it's most important as quickly as possible, as much as possible, because Ukraine will need a lot and for long.
Right, but just for this year, I believe that Ukraine's budget deficit is around 10 billion. So 3 billion is only 1/3 of what would be needed. But I wonder because there are disagreements between various countries and sort of chiefly between sort of Europe as a whole and then the US. So why are these differences in the approach?
I would maybe should make a note that the European side is more cautious. The US, US has a policy of rather strict imposing actions, whatever it takes, sanctions, confiscation, and so on. But the European side is more cautious, and it's probably mostly based because of the economic and financial interest the European side still has in Russia. Not more than one European commercial bank still having financial operations on the Russian market. It's shameful, I would call it. In particular, for example, Raiffeisen, the Austrian bank, which recently even expanded operations, and those operators, they are afraid that Russian side will take appropriate decisions and will confiscate their assets. By the way, the Russian side did it, confiscated one Italian, one German commercial bank assets and proceedings in Russia. I think it's inevitable. We will see how it will go against Raiffeisen, for example. For me, it's a kind of a very interesting example to follow. And indeed, Europeans are more engaged in economic operations with Russia, so that's why this cautious position is explained by economic interests.
Right, but wouldn't it be sort of equally harmful if, for instance, the operations of some of the European companies in Russia were further restricted? You've mentioned Raiffeisen, but there are also other companies, right, not necessarily banks, which are, of course, paying taxes to the Kremlin.
Well, to my opinion, so we had to withdraw from the Russian market completely long time ago. Full economic embargo, that would be probably a proportionate response to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And we still, the Western side still plays certain games, economic games with Russia. Of course, the Russian market is lucrative. Small and medium-sized and big companies make certain profits. But to my mind, it's immoral and probably the same damage, for our interests, because indeed Russia uses those taxes to finance its, military operations against Ukraine and against the West, generally speaking. So that's why the sooner we withdraw, the sooner we put a complete economic embargo on Russian side, and I believe at one point of time it will be simply inevitable. But the better it will be. But now it's still left for own country, national governments' decisions. There are different policies. For example, one what Austria does, another what Poland does, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's still very fragmented picture.
So let me clarify one thing, because so there are apparently some sort of objections to spending this 300 billion because of some sort of legal ramifications. So I wonder, what is the difference between sort of seizing the assets and spending these actual assets, and only using the interest on these assets? So could you perhaps clarify that for me?
That's right. Probably it must be clarified, because those assets are state-owned. And by the international treaties concerning the foreign investments, there are certain provisions which protect state interest in foreign countries. We're not speaking about the commercial companies' assets. It's a state, it's a Russian central bank investments into the different secondary obligations and shares in the West. So that's why it's a state ownership which has certain protection, which has a certain practice to be protected. But let's be back to history. When those aggressor states attacked third countries, and we have used, the third countries, indeed took certain legal actions against those aggressor states. So that's why I don't think we should be lenient and not to react even to the Russian state kind of owned property assets, and to be more acting in order to protect Ukraine rather than Russian economic interests. But right, you're completely correct saying that the state interests have certain higher protection rather than private companies' ones.
One last short question. There was this idea of a $50 billion loan to Ukraine. Have you heard about it? And sort of what is behind this idea?
Excuse me, once again?
A loan that is supposed to be given to Ukraine. I believe the amount is 50 billion. So have you heard of this, and sort of how viable is this idea?
Well, Ukraine is by 50% dependent from foreign aid. For the time of being, only 50% of Ukraine's budget is enough for finance its needs. So it's a high dependency. And the West should look for any mean, giving the macro-financial assistance giving loans, grants, whatever it takes. And probably we will come later this year to the point when we will have to find some additional financial assets to be processed and to be used by or given to Ukrainian sides. It's inevitable because we see that Ukraine can't withstand economically and financially facing such a destructive military aggression from the Russian side.
Petras Auštrevičius, thank you, sir, for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
For your insight.